Okay, finally a day with no major breaking election news that I have to discuss, so I actually have time to get back to foreign policy. And you know, I mean, just a sidebar, but I hate the term foreign policy because it makes it sound so dreary and boring. And what we're really talking about is life and death, war and peace, you know, people getting killed. Serious stuff, the most serious stuff in the world. This is far more important than who is the President of the United States, although who is the President of the United States affects these things. In recent decades, the President of the United States has pretty much exercised plenary power in the field of foreign policy. You know, Barack Obama waged wars against, you know, Congress's will. Trump, however, you know, was much less successful. I think he probably didn't push as hard as he could have. I certainly didn't. You know, he bungled a lot of his efforts to de-escalate things, but I mean, ironically, it was Trump trying to de-escalate war. You know, the various wars across the world that were none of which have been declared by Congress that prompted Congress to try and reclaim their power over foreign policy and over the military and all these things. And so the latest National Defense Authorization Act, which always, every NDAA, is a disgusting swamp bill. You know, if I were ever President of the United States, I'd never sign the NDAA. I would let the previous NDAA lapse and let the war machine all come apart and collapse. That, you know, that would be the correct move for anyone who believes in, you know, truth, justice, and the American way. And, you know, I've been disappointed, although not shocked, that Trump has continued to sign the NDAA, you know, since being elected. However, he's threatening now to not sign the NDAA. And in this NDAA, the Congress actually, you know, they kind of put provisions in there preventing Trump from withdrawing troops from anywhere, saying, no, you have to leave all the troops in Germany and Afghanistan because, you know, we still have to be doing nation building in Germany after, what's it been, 85 years or something since World War II. You know, there's barely any World War II veterans still alive, yet their great-grandsons or great-great-grandsons in some cases, they have to be now stationed in Germany. You know, it doesn't make a lick of sense. But of course, it never made any sense. It's all about money and power. These people, you know, there's a lot of interests who, you know, make a lot of money off of the U.S. military being anywhere and everywhere. Because, you know, the more the U.S. military is spread out, the more resources it consumes and the more contractors it takes to fulfill their needs. Now, unfortunately, this is not the reason why Trump is threatening now to veto the NDAA. He's threatening to veto the NDAA because he wants them to include a provision in it that repeals Section 230 of whatever U.S. code that relates to the immunity of publishers versus what's the distinction? Publishers versus platforms. You know, it's supposed to prevent all sorts of media organizations, but specifically Trump is worried about social media from libel, and this is essentially a provision which allows Facebook and Twitter and all these sites to exist and to curate their own narrative, to editorialize and to censor people on the side that they don't like, but without having to be responsible for whatever is said on the side that they do like. So, for example, the New York Times can't just publish things that are clearly not true about an individual and, like, cancel someone. You know, the New York Times can't really do that, or else they might get sued for libel. Which, what's his name? The Covington kid. He sued a bunch of media organizations for libel or defamation or what have you. And I believe he won in at least a couple of cases. You can't do that to somebody on Twitter. And so Twitter kind of he was able to use this Section 230 thing as a loophole, and there's been arguments about, like, well, why don't you just reform it or whatever, so that these particular platforms aren't able to abuse the provision in such a way. And frankly, I don't find all that stuff to be particularly interesting, so I don't really want to talk about it. Is it an important matter? Yes. But it's not really something that I want to deal with. It's not. There's plenty of people who talk about Section 230 on YouTube. I guarantee you. If you want to listen to that, go listen to somebody else. The important part here is that Trump wants to veto the NDAA, and I can't think of a time at all that this has ever happened. This, I believe, is the 60th consecutive NDAA that is being passed out of Congress, and for Trump to veto it would be a tremendous win for humanity. Now, unfortunately, the pessimist in me says that vetoing the NDAA can probably be undone fairly quickly, that it wouldn't be a permanent thing. It wouldn't be like, okay, Trump vetoes the NDAA and now, the military is disbanded and all the troops have to start flooding back into America and all the wars end because they didn't reauthorize the NDAA. I guess I should get into, for those of you who don't understand the U.S. Constitution, the United States of America is not supposed to have a standing army. It was not intended to, because standing armies are things that, like, empires have, and the U.S. was not supposed to be an empire. A lot of people don't really remember that. It seems like a really long time ago. So the founders put in the Constitution that if Congress is going to raise an army, they can only do it for 2 years. Because it's supposed to be for a specific purpose. So, like, let's say, France declares war on the United States. Congress can, raise an army, and then they go fight the war, and if it's over, if the war ends within that 2-year span or whatever, at the end of that period, the army demobilizes and disbands. But ever since the end of World War II, and actually probably, now that I think about it, since the end of the Civil War, the Congress has just every 2 years created, extended the Army's franchise. They've kept the Army alive. But constitutionally, this is, again, kind of a loophole. It's against the spirit of the U.S. Constitution. And so I think it would be a wonderful thing. Again, this is something it's a very easy thing for me to do if I were ever elected president. Just veto the bill, and then poof, it's gone, and we go back to being America, and not being, Team America World Police. I mean, the founders pretty much intended for the state militias and probably private militias to defend this country. We have the National Guard. It's an incredibly, well organized and frankly more centralized than the founders even would have wanted. Modern equivalent of the state militias, and that's all you need. We do not need to have this military that's far-flowing across the entire globe. And pretty much anyone who disagrees with that, and again, I don't like to make absolute statements like this, but this is a pretty black and white thing. If you disagree with that, that we need to have this global military presence across the globe, you're either one of two things. An imperialist, or you're misinformed. And it's fine to be either one of those things, and if that's how you are, that's fine. That's your opinion. I just happen to think that being an empire is not what I want to be. That's not how I want my country to be run. And so it's always a sad day for me when the NDAA gets passed and reauthorized every time it comes up. But frankly, I do think, as I've said in the past, that the only way this all comes about is not through, through the will of the people, because that I don't think that really has much sway in the United States. It has some sway, but not enough. The way that this whole system is going to come down is by it coming apart, not by it being dismantled willingly. And so it may sound boring, but we have to wait for interest rates to rise. It all comes back to interest rates. as I've been saying since I started this channel. Interest rates, interest rates, interest rates. That's what runs the world, and that's what runs this country. And with all the debt that's been accumulated between, well, frankly, the wars and everything else that the federal government's been doing in the last 20 years, this country cannot handle even moderate interest rates, let alone high interest rates. It wasn't too long ago that interest rates in this country were double digits. That was within the lifetime of most people alive in America today. It's in fact even within the lifetime of some millennials. It was back in the 80s we still had double-digit interest rates, during the Reagan administration. And so that time will come again. Some people think it'll be sooner rather than later. Some people, such as I was just watching an interview from a couple weeks ago with Keith McAuliffe of Hedgeye. He thinks that's coming in the next year, that we're moving into a period of higher inflation. But as I've said, I think that has to be the result of increased government spending, which, by all accounts, we're going to have. So this all will come to a head, and so this might not mean, might not be this Trump vetoing the NDAA here. I don't think will be the end of the matter. I don't think that the wars are going to go away, even if somehow the NDAA was vetoed and nothing was passed, in its place. The military-industrial complex would not just stop. It would continue somehow. Congress would find some way to fund it. So I don't have much faith in it that way. But when the time comes and we get high interest rates in this country, there's no way that the federal government can continue to pay continue to make the payments on all of the debt that we have, the 20-something trillion dollars in debt. It matters. Because if your interest payments get high, all of a sudden the burden of carrying that debt takes up a huge portion of the annual U.S. budget. And then you don't have money left over to do all this crap. The only money you'll have is money that has to be printed, and that's just going to drive up inflation and drive up interest rates even higher. It's a vicious cycle. So once that kicks off, that will be, the final act for America. The military-industrial complex, they're a bunch of bitter clingers, and they're going to hang on until the bitter end of the United States. So with that said, if you gained anything of value out of this video, I'd appreciate you clicking that like button and sharing this video. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe, because I do upload every day, and I'd hate to have you miss one. So I'll see you folks back here tomorrow.